Imagine you just step out of your front door in suburban Los Angeles.
Yeah.
You're just
Yeah.
heading out to grab your morning coffee, and you lock eyes with a mountain lion holding a rabbit in its mouth.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that'll wake you up.
Right. I mean, instantly, the illusion that we've completely tamed the modern world just totally evaporates.
It really does. I mean, we pave over the wild, we put up streetlights, and we kind of just assume the primal world is something that, only exists on a screen.
Mhm.
But today's source material, this sweeping multi-hour interview featuring musician, former bull rider, and Yellowstone actor Ryan Bingham, it really proves that the wild isn't gone. It's actively pushing back.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we are exploring the intersection of extreme physical resilience, our primal connection to the natural world, and how facing raw fear actually forges a completely uncompromised life.
Yeah, it's a super fascinating journey. We're going from the mechanics of surviving in the backcountry with just a piece of bamboo to predators adapting to our highways to a musician turning down a $7 million contract just to keep his soul.
So getting right into it, Bingham's journey into this realization actually begins as an escape. Like he was feeling totally suffocated by the music business, so he just completely removed himself from it.
Right, he enrolls in this 6-week hunting guide school deep in the mountains of Montana. And we're not talking glamping here. He was packing mules, learning wilderness first aid, shoeing horses, and literally sleeping under a single tarp strung between 2 trees.
Just a tarp.
Yeah.
And he wakes up one morning in June, lifts his head from under that tarp, and sees snow accumulating on the backs of the horses.
Snow in June. Unbelievable.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, instead of wanting to run back to, a heater and a soft bed, he has this profound realization that he doesn't want to return to civilization at all. The source material discusses how nature acts almost like an evolutionary drug in moments like that.
Yeah, and it's a measurable physiological shift, too. It's not just a feeling. When you look at a fertile natural landscape, your visual cortex is actually processing natural fractals.
Right. Fractals,
Yeah.
like the repeating patterns.
Exactly. Those complex repeating patterns you see in tree branches or mountain ridges, processing those specific visual inputs physically lowers your cortisol levels.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it shifts your autonomic nervous system away from that sympathetic fight or flight state that urban environments constantly trigger and pushes you into a parasympathetic rest and digest state. I mean, your DNA recognizes a life-giving environment and rewards you with a hit of dopamine just for finding a place that can biologically sustain you.
It's basically the biological equivalent of holding down the buttons on a glitchy smartphone to force a factory reset.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, like when a phone is running 100 apps in the background, it's overheating, it's lagging. You wipe the cache to reboot it back to its baseline operating system, stripping away that constant digital noise, the concrete, the notifications. It allows our dormant sensory processing to just reboot. Bingham even noted that his eyesight, his hearing, his sense of smell, like everything just sharpened.
And those heightened senses allow for a completely different kind of intelligence to take over. It's an intelligence based on physical mechanics rather than digital information. Like Bingham talks about a survivalist named Clay who can distill salt water into pure drinking water using nothing but a fire and a piece of green bamboo.
I found that so interesting. How does a single hollow tube act as a boiler and a collection vessel at the same time? I couldn't quite picture it.
Well, it comes down to understanding the anatomical structure of the plant. So bamboo grows in segments, right? And they're separated by these solid internal joints called nodes.
Okay, yeah.
So Clay cuts a thick section of green bamboo, but he leaves 2 distinct sealed chambers separated by that middle node. He cuts a tiny hole, pours the salt water into the bottom chamber, and shoves that end right into the fire.
And it doesn't just burn through.
Not immediately, because it's green and filled with water. So as the salt water boils, the steam rises, hits the cooler upper node of the bamboo, condenses into fresh water, and trickles down to be collected. I mean, he is basically leveraging the natural thermal architecture of the plant to create a miniature distillation refinery.
That is wild. And it really highlights this massive gap between, understanding concepts in theory and actually applying them under pressure. Bingham experienced this gap firsthand during a fire building drill at that guide school.
Oh, yeah, the snowy drill.
Yeah, the conditions were wet, it was snowy. The instructor gives the class 2 minutes to build a fire with a 3-foot flame. Bingham and the other guys are just struggling, right? They've got modern lighters and damp twigs, generating absolutely nothing but smoke.
Because the instructor made a really critical point there. If you are guiding an elderly hunter who gets injured in the snow, you need to know how to generate heat instantly to prevent hypothermia. You can't just wait around for pristine conditions or perfectly dry wood.
Right, and while the rest of the class is completely failing, this kid from Alaska walks up to a dead pine tree, snaps off a massive branch of dead pine needles, hits it with a lighter, and has a 4-foot roaring fire in like 5 seconds.
5 seconds, that's incredible.
And sometimes applying that survival logic means utilizing the most unnatural materials you can find. They recount a hunting trip in Alaska where it rained for 5 days straight. Everything was soaked. And to finally get a fire going, they used Fritos.
Wait, literally corn chips. Fritos.
Yes, corn chips, because of the chemistry. Fritos are essentially extruded cornstarch soaked in corn oil. So when you introduce a spark, that oil acts as a highly concentrated hydrocarbon fuel source. It burns super hot and stays lit long enough to generate the sustained thermal energy you need to dry out the damp wood underneath it.
That is just pure adaptation. I mean, out in the deep wild, human survival depends on that kind of instant adaptation.
Which brings up a huge question. If the wild is adapting this quickly to survive, why are humans suddenly so terrible at it? Like when disasters hit, why are we so paralyzed while rural communities just kind of handle it? We see this incredible friction when the untamed wild collides with modern civilization.
Oh, totally. We try to impose this rigid infrastructure on highly dynamic ecosystems. Take California, for instance. The state is currently building a massive $100+ million bridge covered in dirt and vegetation over the 101 highway.
Just for the mountain lions, right?
Specifically so mountain lions can cross without getting hit by cars. But simultaneously, problem cats are wandering into suburban neighborhoods. When authorities examine the diets of the cats that have to be removed, up to 50% of their caloric intake consists of domestic dogs and cats.
50%. That is crazy. And the same urban wildland overlap is happening with wolves being reintroduced into places like Colorado and California. There was one tracked wolf that traveled 370 miles from Oregon straight down into Los Angeles County.
370 miles. And, in their natural habitat, wolves operate with these highly sophisticated pack tactics. They will track a mountain lion, wait for the cat to expend the immense energy required to kill a deer, and then swarm the lion to steal the kill. They're incredibly smart.
But then you drop that same hyper-intelligent apex predator near a human suburb or a cattle ranch, and they quickly calculate that tracking a mountain lion is just a waste of energy. A fenced-in pasture of livestock is basically a stationary buffet. They just adapt to the path of least resistance.
Yeah, and the speed of that animal adaptation is staggering. Look at the axis deer in Hawaii. They were gifted to King Kamehameha in the 1800s from India.
Right, and now there are, 30,000 of them?
Exactly, 30,000 of them on the island of Lanai, which only has a human population of 3,000. And you can't easily thin the herd with a bow and arrow because these deer evolved alongside Bengal tigers in India.
Wait, so they're too fast for arrows?
Way too fast. Their auditory processing and fast-twitch muscle fibers are evolutionarily tuned to the snap of a twig hiding a tiger. Hunters have actually captured slow-motion footage showing an axis deer hearing the mechanical twang of a bowstring and physically dodging an arrow traveling 275 feet per second.
That is mind-blowing.
Yeah, by the time the arrow covers a 10-yard distance, the deer has already vacated the space.
So when wildlife operates with that level of ruthless efficiency, our bureaucratic response to natural crises looks, honestly, entirely inadequate. The source material highlights this really stark contrast between bureaucracy and community action. Like, if a bridge washes out in rural Texas or Alaska, you don't wait 6 months for an environmental impact study.
Absolutely not.
A neighbor just drives a backhoe down the road and fixes it.
Right, and you contrast that with the Palisades fires in California. Bingham describes evacuating through howling winds, snapping power lines, waking up to a mountain of black smoke. And when those massive fires burn residential areas to the ground, what remains isn't just natural wood ash.
No, it's super toxic, right?
Yeah, incredibly toxic. It's soil saturated with melted electronics, heavy metals, treated lumber. But when residents attempt to clear their own lots or rebuild, they are completely stonewalled by a labyrinth of government permitting, hazardous waste protocols, and red tape.
Okay, wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second here. Because we're criticizing the bureaucracy, But hasn't unchecked human self-reliance caused a massive portion of these ecological disasters to begin with?
Well, yeah, and that is exactly the core ideological friction the interview exposes. Historically, human interference without oversight has been devastating. I mean, Europeans importing feral hogs to Texas on ships resulted in a population that now numbers in the millions. Because they reproduce at 6 months of age, they cause massive agricultural destruction. So the regulatory mindset looks at that history and dictates that we have to control every single variable to prevent further damage.
But the rural mindset argues that overregulation strips away the practical tools needed to manage the reality that is currently on the ground. Like when legislation bans hunting with dogs, for instance, it removes the most effective mechanism for tracking and managing exploding predator populations, leaving ranchers to suffer the immediate consequences.
Exactly. And navigating that unpredictable, often dangerous reality requires a massive amount of mental conditioning. Which brings us back to Ryan Bingham. He didn't forge his resilience in a boardroom. He found it through brutal physical labor and the rodeo arena.
Yeah, he spent his youth stacking hundreds of hay bales inside unventilated barns in 110-degree Texas heat. He talked about installing fiberglass insulation in residential attics without a safety mask, simply breathing in the glass particulates.
Ugh, that sounds awful.
Right. Those jobs provide a very clear picture of what you want to escape from.
But his method of escape was, arguably, way more violent. He started riding steers at age 10. By the time he advanced to the junior rodeo, he was looking at massive, aggressive bulls with horns sticking out of the chutes, and he was literally in tears from the sheer terror of it.
10 years old. And his uncle didn't force him onto the animal, which is interesting. He told him to take 30 minutes to think about it, making it clear that walking away from the fear would result in lifelong regret. Bingham got on, rode for a few seconds, got bucked off, and realized he had survived.
But surviving a decade of old-school rodeo, and we're talking long before the era of dedicated sports medicine teams, helmets, and padded vests, it extracts an extreme physical toll. He describes getting on a muley bull, which is one without horns, making their movements highly erratic.
Okay.
So after spinning violently, the bull stops and stands dead still. Bingham knows if he jumps off, he falls directly under its hooves, so he spurs the animal to force a jump.
Oh man, what happens?
The bull launches straight up off all 4 feet like a cat. As they come down, the mechanical force violently jerks Bingham forward. He headbutts the bull's skull, and his hand gets trapped in the rigging rope. The bull drags him around the dirt arena and stomps him.
Just brutal.
Yeah.
And the damage is catastrophic. His front teeth are knocked out, and his bottom lip is torn from his face, just hanging by a thread of skin.
Yeah.
And because he doesn't have health insurance, his response isn't to call an ambulance.
Yep.
He gets in a friend's car, holds a bloody rag to his face, and they drive through the night to a trauma center in Dallas just to find an oral surgeon willing to piece his jaw back together.
It's hard to even fathom, but you really have to imagine the psychological shift that occurs after an event like that.
Totally. I think of it like strapping your body to a misfiring car engine block. Once you have willingly subjected yourself to that level of unpredictable mechanical violence and you've survived the absolute worst-case scenario, the mundane fears of everyday life just completely vanish. Public speaking, asking for a raise, sleeping in your truck, none of it registers as dangerous anymore.
Yeah, his uncle really instilled the core philosophy of the sport into him. It's not, I think I can, it's I know I can and I will. You cannot outmuscle a 1,500-pound animal. The entire endeavor relies on the total subjugation of panic. It is literally the most extreme form of exposure therapy imaginable.
And that total subjugation of panic became the entire foundation for his creative life. I mean, he didn't transition to music through a fancy performing arts conservatory. He learned his very first song, a complex mariachi piece called La Malagueña, from an old man playing dominoes in Laredo.
Just some guy playing dominoes.
Yeah, the guy simply took Bingham's untuned guitar, tuned it by ear, and showed him the finger-picking technique.
That's amazing. And so he started learning chords one by one, writing songs to entertain his rodeo buddies in the back of pickup trucks on weekends, miles away from any radio signals. Eventually, the economics of his life completely shifted. He realized that playing a guitar in a local bar earned him $100 in tips for 2 hours of work, plus free food.
Which, compared to digging holes in the blazing sun all day for less money, was an absolute revelation. He leaped into full-time music without a safety net because his baseline for survival was already so deeply established. He knew how to pull over and chop firewood or wash dishes at a diner just to afford the gas money to the next town.
And this mental conditioning paid massive dividends when he was eventually cast in the hit television series Yellowstone. I mean, he had absolutely zero formal acting training. The show's creator, Taylor Sheridan, bluntly told him that if he was terrible on screen, his character would just be killed off.
Talk about pressure.
Right, but instead of freezing under the pressure, Bingham utilized his bull riding technique, channeled the extreme anxiety and adrenaline into singular focus. He let the veteran actors around him drive the scene, and he simply reacted with a natural, unfiltered presence.
The source material constantly circles back to this idea of unfiltered independence. They highlight Oliver Anthony, the viral musician who recorded a song in a field with zero production value.
Oh, yeah, huge viral moment.
Right. Yeah. And when the video exploded, the music industry rushed in with a reported $7 million contract. And he turned it down just to maintain his creative freedom.
Because the mathematics of those industry contracts dictate that a label only offers that sum if they know they can extract double that amount from the artist's labor, usually while trapping them in restrictive legal covenants. Anthony and Bingham both understand that if you possess the talent and a direct connection to the audience, the corporate intermediary is entirely unnecessary.
Which makes you think about your own life and career for a second. Are there invisible contracts you signed? Like, have you traded away your authenticity, your creative freedom, or your voice simply to maintain the illusion of security?
It's a tough question, because the art that resonates deeply with millions of people requires profound vulnerability. Bingham treats his music not as a commercial product, but as a mechanism for processing trauma. He talks about singing his deepest pain to an empty wall just to heal himself. That raw output is the direct byproduct of lived hardship and radical self-reliance. You just can't synthesize that in a corporate studio.
No, you really can't. Well, we have covered some incredible terrain today. We explored how stepping into the untamed wild physically alters our biology, shifting our nervous systems out of chronic stress and waking up our dormant survival instincts.
We examined the friction between modern bureaucracy and the ruthless, rapid adaptation of wild ecosystems. And we saw how profound physical trials, like facing down a massive bull, forge a resilience that makes everyday anxieties completely irrelevant.
Channeling that hard-won grit allows for a life of uncompromised authenticity. The challenge for you, listening right now, is to identify your version of the rodeo arena. You don't need to risk your physical safety, but you do need to actively seek out discomfort to build the resilience required to live on your own terms.
Exactly. Treat the friction in your life not as a barrier, but as the rigorous conditioning necessary to hold your ground when the pressure genuinely mounts.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to ponder. We established today that our physiology is hardwired to reward us with dopamine and a sense of peace when we survive physical risks in the natural world. But as technology advances, we are rapidly approaching an era where virtual reality and AI will be able to perfectly simulate these primal dangers, the visual fractals of the forest, the sudden adrenaline spike of a predator, the sheer terror of the unknown. So if we can reliably trigger our evolutionary survival rewards from the absolute safety of our living rooms, will our biology even know the difference? Or are we just inventing a more technologically advanced way to cage ourselves?